Hi, this is Adam Field. Welcome to Artaxis Conversations. Today I'll be talking about Ongi and my Ongi apprenticeship in South Korea in 2008. I was able to study at Obuja Ongi, which is about an hour and a half south and east of Seoul, with the Kim family. Um, Kim Il-man is the father there up in the top center, and his four sons. I studied mostly with Kim Il-man and his youngest son, Kim Yong-ho, in the front center. One of the great things about my Ongi apprenticeship is that I had the opportunity to help the Kim family to bring their family practice back to some more traditional methods. And they made a few changes along the way throughout their process. So first in processing clay, when I arrived, they had been mixing fresh water with raw clay and isolating the small particles to then be stored in a slip tank, and the clean water that would settle at top would then be skimmed off. Um, and so very mechanized, as you can see, and the change that we made was to build this. And you can see the clay and water would be mixed in the first two pits, and then there was an evaporation pond for us to be able to get this fine particle clay body, which would then be mixed with the raw clay on its own. And so essentially we were just boosting up the amount of fine particles in that source clay. And once it had been compressed and de-aired, then we would homogenize it and mix those two different consistencies of body together for the final clay body that we would make the jars with. Once the clay was ready to go, then we would roll coils, as you'll see in this next video. A lot of the transitions that we made to bring the studio practice back to more traditional techniques came from research that included a lot of paintings and drawings, as well as some written text, in order for my teachers to figure out some of the changes that they needed to make in the studio. Even before they started making these transitions, they would use kick wheels, and they're one of the few studios in Korea to really still practice Ongi that way. During my time at Obuja, I made about 500 of these large jars, and almost all of them got cut in half. I would save a few of them in the time that I was there. But the idea was for me to learn the technique, and in doing so, I ended up learning the history as well. An example of production that is one day of lid production there on the left side of the image by the father Kim Il-man. Glazing and Firing. We also changed the glaze making process back to the traditional way where we would mix wood ash that we had produced in heating the studio through the winter with some iron-rich clay that you can see on the ground around these pits to create the glaze that we would then apply to leather hard pots to be single fired.
얼마 앞에 이러는 거요? 어? 같지 않나? 아유! 너가 조그만 거 만든다, 조그만 일인데. 이것도 내가 알겠어. 아이고, 여기 껴갖고.
After about a month of drying, the jars would be loaded into this 100-foot long tunnel-style kiln where they would be fired for 5 days. The first 3 days would be a very gradual climb to help dry out the pots, and then on the 4th and 5th day we would increase the intensity of the flame, melting out the front of the kiln at about cone 7 or 8, and then gradually over about a 5-hour period, we would move that heat zone from the front to the back of the kiln, melting the glaze throughout. And here's a video of a typical stoke of the kiln. Once the jars had had a chance to cool, it was time for them to be unloaded. A great historical image of a delivery person taking these jars from the kiln to market to be sold. We would have a very short trip taking these pots halfway across the property to a little display area where customers would come to purchase directly from the Kim family. For larger jars, we would deliver to the customers. So in this case, this was a Buddhist temple where we had delivered 13 of these large jars for them to ferment foods in. An important distinction is that historically these jars would have been in a small kind of patio area in a small village to be the pantry and food storage for those individuals in the immediate area. In this case, you can see soy sauce is being made, and other uses would be, in this case, that's indigo for making blue dye, and there are really dozens of different applications for these jars. But what happened is when there was this mass migration into high-rise buildings, people didn't have space for these jars anymore, and so recently there's been an increase in what some friends of mine would call like a microbrew for these fermented foods, and you get the food being fermented traditionally, and then that food, in the same way that wine is aged and fermented in barrels to really kind of get a quality ferment, and then these fermented foods are packaged commercially and sold en masse to really be able to continue some of the fermentation methods that go so far back. So in a way, it's been really great to see that the health benefits of these fermented foods has driven that demand for these jars, and as well as the the difference in flavor And ongi, it looked like as metals and plastics and glass became more affordable, ongi was kind of being pushed out. And in more recent years, it's been nice to see that that tradition is actually coming back around. If you'd like more information, I have some on my website as well as my YouTube channel where you can see extended versions of these videos. And thank you for watching.